everybody. I'm delighted to be with you here this afternoon, and thanks, Mary, for the welcome. So just to say a bit about my background, I am originally a language learner, and one of my fellow language learners from my undergrad is actually here today as well, Linnea. I'm originally a language learner, lover of languages, and what I loved about that was the ability that languages give you to make connections, to develop your sense of identity, and to give you some insights into how we learn. In fact, because languages are very particular, and there's a lot to be learned from languages in terms of how we learn anything. So I started with a degree in languages and literature, moved on to linguistics, became a computer scientist, and now I'm in education. So this whole landscape around AI, where we're looking for patterns and beautiful things in data, this is something that's very kind of close to my heart and somewhere where I find myself very comfortable. So already today, I have learned so much. I don't know about you. My brain is pretty much full. My hands up, whose brain is full yet? Yeah. Yeah, lots to take away, and very transformative ideas I felt in what we were talking about today. I feel like I have a fire lit, loads of things to go away and try after the talks this morning. So what I'm going to set about trying to do with this talk is, it's about the future, but I really want to kind of catch up on, the pace of change where we are at the moment is so fast. We can feel like it's accelerating ahead of us, that's, nearly out of control. So what I wanted us to kind of talk about today is to remember that we are still human, after all. We are still, our timescales for evolution are different. We're not evolving as humans at the same time scale as technology is. So I just want to make some time here and try and think about how can we frame our thinking about the future, and but at the same time trying to be guided by what we know or what we think we know at the moment about how we operate as human beings. So as a first part to that, I'm just going to invite you for a moment just to come back and be grounded in the present. So just to take a few breaths, because the only thing we have is the present, really. The future is going to come, but it's not, we only have this moment. So just to take a couple of breaths, lift your toes, lower your toes, before we move on into thinking about the future. Because we have to remember that we are always grounded in our bodies as humans, and what's important is here and where we are in the moment. So in thinking about the future, I asked Microsoft to give me some pictures, and it gave me these, which have a lot of technology and a lot of education and a fair amount of gazing into space, which is beautiful too. When I asked Google Images, I got a bit more of a utopian, dystopian view, a bit more of a mixture for the kind of things that we're thinking about when we're looking into the future. But I suppose the main thing to remember when we're talking about the future is that the future is 100% utterly fiction. It's not knowable. We can't actually predict it accurately. We can, move towards that, but we certainly can't control it. And if this is our position that we're in, how are we going to deal with it? Especially in a world like today. So we have that kind of, wrong clicker. When we have the world today, which is this VUCA world, coming from the fall of the Berlin Wall and the coming down, the kind of end of communism and so on. That the American military were talking about, this VUCA world that we're in, where everything is highly volatile, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of complexity, things, one thing affects another and are connected in ways that we can't necessarily anticipate, and loads of ambiguity. We've a lot of data, but we're not sure always how to interpret that. So we could say, actually, that the world has always been quite a VUCA world. If we spoke to some poor Londoner in Tudor England where the monasteries have just been shut and you've just been told that God isn't what you thought God was and all of this kind of thing, I'd say they would have said, this is a VUCA world. But it certainly is now also. But we can, one thing we can say for definite about now is that the pace of technological change is accelerating. I don't know about you this morning, but in Nell's talk, I was like nearly shaking. It's just like, oh my God, where are we going next? And we are struggling to keep pace with that. I mean, I'm struggling from this morning to this afternoon to keep pace with that. And so this is the challenge that we face. And here are lots of the challenges that we do face. So, there's no shortage. We've got climate change, biodiversity loss. We have this idea which keeps coming up today of the singularity, which is, that AGI, that artificial generalized intelligence, getting to a point where, what is our purpose as humans? Because machines do everything that we do. They do some things, lots of things, better, potentially, not too far in the distant future. And they can probably emulate a lot of the things that we think of as being very human qualities, so they have emotion, or they display emotion maybe rather than having emotion, empathy, creativity, and so on. If that can be explained and modeled by algorithms, well then, where do we sit as humans in that possibility? And already today, that this kind of notion of this epidemic of loneliness and despair, and there's lots of kind of challenge out there. So, what does the future hold for us when already, this is our present and it's looking like it's going to be difficult to move ahead with? So how then are we going to deal with this? How are we going to think about the future when we have all this uncertainty and all of these challenges that we have to prepare for, even though we acknowledge that the future is unknowable and uncontrollable and something might happen tomorrow that will change it all again? So I'm going to use Jim Dater's 4 future scenarios for this, which I always find it's kind of a really useful frame for thinking about the future. And it comes from empirical evidence of how people tend to visualize or represent futures for themselves. So you have that kind of things will just keep on as they are. They might get a bit bigger and a bit better, that continued growth version, which is just kind of let's go on as we are. We have the, oh my God, it will all collapse and decline, end of the Roman Empire type of collapse model, where we'll hit an inflection point and everything will go to hell. We have the kind of halfway point, where this disciplined kind of structure, where it is that we're going to continue, there's going to be change, it'll probably go somewhat downhill, but within limits, we can manage that. Let's say, thinking about energy use, we'll be progressing with those limitations on ourselves around there's, planetary boundaries around energy use and so on. And then there's the last version, which is transformation, where we hit an inflection point, something happens, and we hit an inflection point, and things just change radically, so in such a way that we can't anticipate, or they've utterly transformed the system that we're in. And those 4 models here, those 4 little graphs, are mapped all onto each other in this graph here from John Smart. And the kind of point with this one is that depending on your point of view, we are always in a growth, limited, decline, and transformation scenario, depending on which way you look at it. So we could be thinking, oh, we're just in that kind of continue as we are mode, where someone else looking at this will say, society is collapsing, and someone else would say, we've come to a new inflection point and we're transforming. So all of those different scenarios can be at play at the same time, depending on your point of view, and they certainly come to pass within kind of life cycles of systems and of humans. So we're kind of always thinking about this continuation, decline, or transformation scenario. And another kind of tool to use, I suppose, when we're thinking about the future, so if we've got those 4 possible futures, they probably fall into these different categories, if you like. So this is the future cone, where the point of the cone is now, and we can probably predict pretty carefully or pretty closely what will happen tomorrow, less closely what will happen in a year, and then 10 years' time, obviously, we're getting, it's harder and harder to predict. And on the outside, we have those things that could happen maybe, but they're pretty very unlikely, the preposterous futures. Then we have the possible futures, the ones that are, they could happen. They might happen in the future. And then we've got the plausible futures that are really those ones that are quite likely. And within that, then, we've got our projected future, the one that's looking most likely based on where we are now. And sitting across those, we're going to have the ones that we want, our preferred futures. What are they? Some of them might be very close to what we are now. They might sit in that projected future. Some might be, off in the plausible and possible and even the preposterous zones. But it's very useful to kind of think through what is our preferred future and how do we want to move towards that. So if we're thinking about that for education, what are our futures? What about education? So some of the things that we can think about in that are, first of all, why? Why is education needed, or what's the purpose of education within these futures? Secondly is the what. What are we going to be learning in these possible futures? And the last one is the how and maybe the where of, how's that going to happen? So there's a reason and there's what it is we're going to develop, but then how are we going to make that happen? So in terms of the why, there's always that tension that education is about educating people, getting people ready for the economy and, preparing workers for the economy. We've got some images of very classic jobs. Obviously, from the discussions this morning and from what we know about the way things are moving, is that educating people to be a particular job is probably something from the past, and we're going to have to much more think about how people are going to adapt. That's going to be what people are going to need to do. So in this scenario, anyone who has kids and watched Ninjago, best, love it. We're thinking about education is all about reaching your full potential. And, according to the Irish government, that's what education is for. It's to help us achieve our full potential or our true potential. And so education has that goal. And not in contrast to this, but kind of building on this, we can take Hannah Arendt's quote here about education is the point at which we decide whether we love the world enough to assume responsibility for it. So in this scenario, it's not about me as an individual reaching my full potential. It's about me certainly aiming for greater potential, aiming to reach my true potential, but with the goal of improving the world, renewing the world, seeing what we need to do with the world because we are here and we love it and we want to keep it for our children, make it better. And in that sense, then maybe what education is about or should be about is about building capacity to imagine and create preferable futures. So we want people, going through their learning process, but thinking about where they want to be, where they want the world to be, and how we can move towards that in a creative way. So this is one example from the OECD of turning to the what we want, in the future, what we might be learning. And this is, it's not very far into the future. We're talking about 2030. It's still very much an aspirational view, and also not without its critiques, but an aspirational view of where we might want to go. One of the key things in this is that the target, if you like, or the direction is well-being. So well-being is a key outcome within this OECD learning compass. So certainly there are skills, there is disciplinary knowledge, interdisciplinary knowledge, and there are attitudes and values that can contribute to our decision-making and our judgment and so on. But one of the key goals is that we feel well within this, through our education, building through our educational journey. And on the outside, we have these transformative competencies, if you like, which are, taking responsibility, acting ethically, how to reconcile tensions and deal with all of those tensions that exist in the world. And also creating new value. Again, new value always brings us back kind of nearly to that economic kind of feel, but it's not just value in terms of money, but value in terms of ideas and so on. How do we create? If we're thinking about the how and the where of schooling, we've got, again, from the OECD, 4 possible scenarios that map more or less to the those Jim Dater futures. So we've got one scenario, which is things will just go on as they are. Schools will stay as schools, and but they might get a bit better at it. And then we've one kind of collapse scenario where educational systems and institutions as we know them will disintegrate, dissolve, and learning will happen in some other kind of distributed way, probably supported by technology. And then we've got 2 more scenarios that are more transformative. One that keeps that model of school but opens it outwards, thinks about it as being more porous to the community that it's in and to the outer world. So you have that idea of knowledge passing in and out of school walls. And then you have the learning as you go scenario, which also is a kind of a transformative scenario. Again, powered by technology, but looking at dissolving those boundaries between formal and informal, but moving learning ahead for the good of society. When I asked Open Art to draw me some pictures of what they saw as the future, or what it sees as the future of learning, it gave me some things that are really very like schools and learning situations today, just with a good bit more blue lighting. So I asked for schools in the future in the year 2100 or 2200, or people learning, or kids learning, or adolescent learning, and they just kept coming up with the same stuff. It's amazing. And what that was demonstrating to me is the power and the inertia of the past when it comes to education. It takes a lot to pull away from that gravitational pull of what has been happening in the past in order to kind of generate new ideas of the future. And it also demonstrates that AI, for all that it's really useful and great, it does just rely on the past. You know, its data is historic. Its data is past data. So, you know, if we're looking for it to generate future ideas, it's going to need some prompts that are good from us. You know, it's going to need some pushes in the direction to move it away from that kind of that heavy gravitation of the past. But if we think about where we are now, and we're going to use the present, maybe the past and the present, to help us to think about the future. What do we know now about how humans learn that we can use then in our imaginations and to kind of create those preferred futures, those desirable futures that you want to envisage? And Jeff Bezos is reported, you know, to have said about the certainties when it comes to Amazon. It's pretty much certain that the customer is going to want lower prices. So, you know, the world will change, technology will change, stuff will go up and go down and move and whatever else, but there's probably no scenario in which customers are going to want to pay more. So, you know, there are some certainties or some things that we know about what drives human beings in a learning situation that we can use to inform our thinking. So for this, I'm going to use Ryan and Detchi's self-determination theory, just to kind of help frame this for us. So this is the ARC model, which, sorry, my computer just died there. Hopefully I'll remember what I'm going to say. Which sets up 3 kind of aspects that allow us to think about what drives us as human beings. So we've got autonomy, that feeling of choice and willingness. And when we feel that that is satisfied, we have that feeling of doing what we want to do. We're doing it because we want to do it. And when it's not satisfied, we feel compelled and stressed and pushed and under pressure and subjugated. Then we have competence, which is that feeling of mastery and effectiveness. And when it's in operation, you know, when it's satisfied, this desire, this basic human desire, we feel like we're doing well. We're happy, you know. We're successful. We feel like we're effective in what we're doing. When it's not satisfied, we basically feel incompetent, which, as all of us know, anyone who's tried, when you try something new and you feel incompetent, it's awful and it's very demotivating. And then the last one that we have, the very human part of us, because we are social beings, is relatedness. And it's that feeling of belonging and connectedness. So when it's satisfied, we feel like we belong. We feel like we're connected to others. And when it's not satisfied, we feel alone. We feel alienated and isolated. And so these are the three drivers, if you like, of human activity. So this theory and model have been put into practice across a whole range of domains, from addiction studies to education to gaming. So there's a whole pile of empirical evidence behind this, if you like. And if we think about into the future, what we might want to do, and this is only the near future because God only knows what's coming next year, when it comes to what's possible. So if we think about what we want to achieve with learning, if we want our learners to feel more competent, so to satisfy that desire, if you like, among humans, we think about authenticity of tasks and experiences and assessment. So when people are doing things that are authentic to the real world, to the experiences that they know they're going to have to deal with in a non-learning situation, that satisfies that feeling of competence. And things like virtual reality or simulations that have been around for a long time can address that make more real the learning scenarios that people experience. So it's the from a language learning or a language teaching point of view, you might go in and order loads of fake coffees in your language classroom, but that moment where you're actually given a coffee into your hand and you've asked for it in another language, that's empowering and wonderful. And then we have the relatedness side of things. So if we talk about, how to support people's feeling of relatedness. So cooperative learning as a methodology or as an approach to learning has, again, 20 years worth of evidence for how it successfully supports, improves learning outcomes, but also people's sense of self-efficacy, and also in areas like reducing bullying and so on. So we've got this cooperative learning methodology that supports people feeling connected to each other, and that enhances a feeling of relatedness. So all of the Web 2.0 tools that we have had for a long time that build connections to others, to other real humans, they can support or they can be put into play for relatedness. And this links into, where Mairead, her talk earlier on, where she was talking about the presence, the social presence, teaching presence, and cognitive presence. That relatedness issue is core to a lot of online or e-learning environments. When we're going into the future, AI agents, as we've heard, are going to do something for us in this area. They're going to do something. What that is, I don't think the evidence or the research is there yet. They're certainly going to help us feel like we're not alone in our learning journey. They can give us the nudges and the hints and the coaching and the tutoring that we need. How we are going to respond to that or react to that or overly connect to that or rely on it, we just don't know yet, I don't think. There's a lot of research coming out in the last couple of years just because the technology hasn't been there. So we don't know how humans are going to react, how they're going to feel about their Alexa when their Alexa becomes more part of their life. Is it going to be a tool user relationship? No, it doesn't seem to be that. Even now, it doesn't seem to be that. Now it seems to be a little more like a master-servant scenario where very much, the technology is the downstairs and we're the upstairs. But you never know what way this is going to progress as it gets more, as we get more evolved, if you like, as the AI agents become better able to emulate humans. Should they be allowed to pretend to be human? Should we regulate against that? And there's lots of questions here, and Mairead was saying earlier on, we're going to have problems with people being addicted to or overly connected to their AIs, and we just don't know what's going to happen in that field. When it comes to the intersection of autonomy and competence, something that has been going on for a long time and will only get better is personalization. So we've been talking about hyper-personalization, but that addresses the two needs of autonomy and competence. So on the one hand, you might have tasks and so on that are more tailored to you, to your interests. You feel competent, you feel effective, they're more authentic, and you feel like you've kind of selected them. They're for you. So you've got those two needs being met nicely when you talk about personalization, and even more so, hyper-personalization. When it comes to feedback, which is my personal kind of favorite when it comes in terms of things that are effective for learning, there's mountains of evidence about the effect, the high effect size of timely, constructive feedback on learning. It works. It's very, very effective. It's also very costly and very hard to do in a human-to-human scenario, because most of the time we just don't have the time as educators to give the feedback that's needed. So if we have timely and constructive feedback from an AI, generated by an AI that's trusted enough, is accurate enough, that'll it satisfies our sense of, I've got a pat on the back, I'm doing well. It gives us that sense of mastery. If we have the addition in the feedback of feed forward, which is what we really need, which is, what do I do next? So I'm doing this well, what do I do next? What do I do to move forward, to set towards my goals? That starts to hit that intersection of autonomy and competence, where it's about our feeling of choice, of meeting our own goals, but at the same time feeling effective. And it is very hard to generate good feedback. There's a lot of evidence around automated feedback that it tends to be good on the macro level, gets worse when you're going on the micro level, and gets worse as you go to the macro level. And we really need to be exploring that in our research with the AI. So, it's not perfect yet. We're going to be getting generic feedback until there's enough kind of feedback loops in the system. So we need to check whether the generated AI feedback with feed forward is good enough. And that's going to be, some of the research that we'll continue to do. But then you hit the sweet spot in the middle that addresses autonomy, relatedness, and competence, because feedback as a process, and learning, as we were talking about earlier, it's a dialogic process. It's not me alone, it's me in dialogue with some other, whether it's a human other or an agent other. And we, as the learner, have to engage in a dialogic way with whatever feedback we're getting. So we're trying to kind of have that backwards and forwards. And that hits the nice spot between feeling not alone, we're connected in our learning, we're involved in a dialogue around it, we're making choices about it and directing ourselves, we're becoming self-regulated, and at the same time we're feeling competent and we're having an experience of mastery. And so we won an award with Richie and Ian, who Richie's there, and Ian just on Monday, which is looking at that sweet spot for a very particular area. So looking at multilingual learners who typically might feel disconnected from their learning environment. So they may not have the language of the classroom, and they'll be feeling separate and possibly alienated within their learning environment. So in this, with this award, what we're going to do is, how do we foster better student-teacher relationships by leveraging what multilingual Gen AI can do for us with feedback? So we're going to try and take feedback as that lovely site of dialogue to develop people's sense of connection within the learning environment. So, there's lots of potential when we're thinking about what these things into the future. And then the last thing to remember, of course, is when we're selecting what it is that we want to do, that we should be thinking about access. So not to be necessarily taking the low-hanging fruit, but taking the difficult, the challenging barriers and addressing those. Because when we address a challenging barrier for one person, it actually solves lots of barriers for most of the others in the classroom as well. Although I do have in my mind from this morning the minimum viable product thing from Richard's talk, where I'm thinking all the time, okay, keep it simple, but at the same time tackle some of the hard problems, maybe tackle just one of the hard problems. And so if we go back to the future, you know, what are your preferred futures, or what are our preferred futures? If we think, you know, the learning experience at its best is transformative for the human, for the individual. Mesereau talks about a transformation through education that changes your worldview. It changes who you are and how you view the world, and possibly collectively how we view and operate within the world. And so if we think about those futures that are available to us from an individual point of view, for the individual learner, we want to aim for the transformative future for them in their lives. And we can bring that, if we keep thinking about ourselves as humans and ourselves as grounded individuals that are moving along, you know, we're changing all the time, but there's some aspects of us that we can kind of hold, that kind of model of what drives us as humans. We can hold that and bear that in mind when we're going into these very changeable futures. And I'm just going to finish off by reminding us, it's the last thing, have a listen. We're here, we're alive, we're embodied, we've got our breath, and the future might be vast, but we'll deal with it.